Julius Caesar, Act-1, Scene-2. Now, we are going to begin this scene, but before I go ahead with detailing, explaining the scene, I would request all of you who are listening to me to please refer to my video number 31, where I have detailed the difference between Old English and New English. New English is what we speak, and Old English is the Victorian or the Shakespearean English. So, our knowledge of that change in English language would really stand you in good stead while studying Julius Caesar, or any of Shakespeare's plays for that matter. Okay, now let's begin. This scene opens in a public place where Caesar, Antony, Calpurnia, Portia, Decius, Cicero, Brutus, Cassius, and Casca, and a soothsayer have gathered along with lots of other people, and they are all going to the races. Now, races was a very famous thing to do on festivals and on occasions. And we find that this is the festival of Lupercal. Lupercal was the goddess of fertility and plenty. Amongst them, all these people that have been enumerated before, Antony was the only one who had an athletic body and who enjoyed races. So he was the one who was going to take part in the race. So Caesar tells Calpurnia to stand in the path of Antony when he runs the race. And Caesar also tells Antony not to forget to touch Calpurnia in his speed, because the elders said, it was said that women who were barren, who could not bear children, would become fertile and produce children if they were touched by the racer. Antony says that if Caesar says, so it shall be done. Now, just then, Caesar hears a voice calling out to him, and he bids everyone to be silent and asks, who is it in the press that calls on me? That means he is asking in that crowd, who was that person who wanted to talk to him? Bring him face to face with me. Because his voice was sharper than the other noises of the crowd. Brutus says that it's a soothsayer who wishes you to be on guard on the Ides of March. Now, Brutus is telling Caesar that the soothsayer wishes to convey that Caesar should be on guard on the Ides of March. Ides of March is the 15th of March. So now, if this is happening, the feast of Lupercal was happening on the 15th of February. So that is exactly 1 month from that, something would happen to Caesar. And Caesar had to be on guard for that. Caesar says, oh no, he does not really much bother about soothsayers, prophecies which people make. But he tells Antony to make sure that all rituals and all ceremonies are performed for the race. On one side, Cassius asks Brutus if he would like to go and visit the races and watch the races from close by. Brutus says no. Cassius says, I request you to please go there. But Brutus declines. He says that he is not a sportsman and he does not have that sort of a spirit like Antony has. Because Antony was a sportsman, he loves races. Cassius then says to Brutus that of late he had been observing that there was no gentleness, no show of love from the eyes of Brutus which he was used to, of which he was used to. So Cassius says that there is nothing. Brutus did not have a bad impression of it. And Cassius should not form a wrong impression because he had not revealed to Cassius all the things that were troubling him. And therefore, there was a worried look in the eyes of Brutus. He says that he had been feeling some contradictory feelings in his heart, which were causing him trouble, and because of which Cassius had misinterpreted his attitude. Brutus says that he, because of being busy in other thoughts, sometimes forgot to express his graciousness towards his friends like Cassius. Cassius thanks Brutus for clearing up the misunderstanding. Then Brutus says to Cassius that he would make sure from then onwards that Cassius should not see that look in his eyes. Then Cassius asks Brutus that if it was possible for Brutus to see his own face. Brutus says, no, he could not see his own face except by reflection in something. Cassius says that is of course right, but it is much lamented. People feel sorry that Brutus does not have mirrors or things, something like mirrors that would reflect his own worthiness into his own eyes. See, I'm stopping from the text. I am trying to tell you that Cassius is trying to sow the seeds of revolt in Brutus. He is trying to find out if Brutus has some inner feelings, some grudges against Caesar. Because Cassius is very much against Caesar. He wants to plot and plan against Caesar, but he also understands that he cannot proceed without the help of Brutus. So here we find him sowing the seeds which will eventually lead to a revolt. So Cassius says that he had heard in places where high honorable Romans went, except of course Caesar, and these people whom he talked to were all honorable Romans and were all troubled by the hard conditions that were being imposed on them by the present times. That is, what he meant was that Caesar was trying to be a dictator and imposing conditions to which the noble Romans were not used to. Cassius tells Brutus to be prepared to hear from him the reasons why he could not see what was hidden in his mind. And since he could not see himself in the absence of a mirror, Cassius would become the glass within which Brutus could discover himself, revealed without exaggeration. Now, here we find in line 67, he says, I, your glass, will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. So he is trying to tell him that he would become the glass, and then Brutus would be able to discover what other people see in him, but Brutus does not realize his own qualities. Now that would give him reason enough to doubt if he were in the habit of laughing and joking. Now, Brutus is very clear, he is very adamant. But Cassius is trying to convince Brutus that Brutus should have all faith in Cassius, because Cassius was not in the habit of laughing and joking with all kinds of people. He did not mix with rabid company, with vulgar people. Now, Brutus is very clear, he is very adamant. But Cassius is trying to convince Brutus that Brutus should have all faith in Cassius, because Cassius was not in the habit of laughing and joking with all kinds of people. He did not mix with rabid company, with vulgar people. And he had taken oaths of loyalty to be a true Roman. He also said that he would not flatter Brutus into disbelieving something which was not true. He also says that if he were a man who fawned on men and hugged them hard, that he who flattered people and then hugged them hard, and after, when they had gone behind their backs, he told tales about them. He was not that sort of a person. Therefore, Brutus should have faith on him and believe in whatever Cassius told him. Now, here we see in line 80, before line 80, that Brutus hears the sound of people shouting, and he says, "I do fear the people choose Caesar for their king." Now, these words are enough to tell Cassius that Brutus also was afraid that Caesar might become king. And this is all that Cassius wanted. So he says, do you fear it? Then must I think you would not have it so? So that means Cassius clearly says that if you are afraid of Caesar becoming king, then automatically it follows that you would not want him to be a king. Brutus says, "I would not, Cassius, yet I love him well." So Brutus says that I would not want him to become king, but he still loved Antony. But why? And then Brutus wants to know why Cassius was holding him there for such a long time. What was the information that he wanted to discuss or reveal to Brutus? Because if Brutus was in a hurry, he says, if it is something that is for the general good of the public of Rome, then if Cassius set honor in one eye and death in the other, he would look at them both equally bravely, because he did not worry about death. He was more worried about honor. He is very clear that Brutus is very clear in saying that he loved honor more than he feared death. Now, we go on proceed to line 90 because we have done it up till here. Now Cassius says, "I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I do know your outward favor." Now Cassius is trying to flatter Brutus. He says, "I know that you are a very honorable person and you do not fear death. And I know this virtue, this quality in you, just as well as I can recognize your face." He continues to say that honor was the topic that he wanted to talk about. So Brutus had already said that he wanted honor. He would not take honor any time and he did not fear death. So Cassius has taken him up on that point, and he says honor is what he wanted to talk about. Then he says he did not understand, he could not say what other men thought of life. This is Cassius speaking to Brutus, telling him that he was not aware what other people thought of life. But as far as he was concerned, he would rather not live than be in fear of something as himself. Now, these lines are here. Line 94. I cannot tell you what other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as lief not be as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself. This is clear indication that he says, I would rather die than live in fear of somebody who is like me, like in fear of another man, which he means is Caesar, of course. He says he would not live in fear of Caesar. He would rather see him die. Then again, he adds, this is all now, listen to me, this is all trying to bring out the truth from Brutus, what he actually thought, so that he could be merged into the plot that Cassius was brewing in his mind. He says, Cassius goes on to say, I was born as free, so as Caesar, so were you. We have both fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. So he says, he compares Cassius, Brutus, and Caesar, that all of them have eaten the same type of food. All of them are as brave as the other one, and all of them could endure the winter's cold, the cold of the winter season. And then, after this, he begins to talk of events, eventualities, incidents where Caesar had proved himself to be weak. All this are to remove the aura of invincibility from the mind of Brutus. Because everybody thinks that Caesar is invincible. He was all powerful. He had defeated Pompey, and the people of Rome loved him like anything. So to create a revolution, Cassius had to play on the mind of Brutus. And that is what he says. He says, for once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me. Now, Cassius is relating this incident that once upon a time, when the mighty river Tiber was overflooded, was flooding on its shores, was striking at its shores. Chafing here means that rubbing hard against the shores. And it was in fury. And that day Caesar said to me, darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood and swim to yonder point. Means Caesar challenged Cassius to jump into the river as it was rapidly flowing and reach a further point across the river on the further shore. Cassius further says, upon the word, accoutred as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So indeed he did. So Cassius says, as I was dressed, I did not change my dress, I did not take off my armor, I just plunged into that river just as I was and asked Caesar to follow. Caesar did, because that was his bravery. Caesar too did not hesitate. He jumped into that raging river dressed as he was. And the torrent roared, and we did buffet it with lusty snews, throwing it aside and stemming it with hearts of controversy. Now, here in these lines, Cassius is clear. He says that both of us used all our muscles and all our strength to buffet, throw away the waters and fight against its power, the power of the river Tiber, to go across. But ere we could arrive at the point proposed, Caesar cried, help me, Cassius, or I sink. So here, Cassius brings the point that Brutus had to agree that Caesar was weak. Caesar, at one point of time in the river, before they reached the point they had decided to reach, tried to seek help from Cassius. He said, Help me, Cassius, for I sink. And Cassius carried Caesar upon his shoulder to the shore, to the next shore, obviously. So that shows that Cassius had double the strength of Caesar. Now here he has given the example, I as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear, so from the waves of Tiber did I the tired Caesar. Now, Cassius calls back upon his memory and talks about the fight that the Greeks had in Troy. There was a Trojan prince, his name was Aeneas, and Aeneas' father was hurt and Troy was burning. So Aeneas carried his father Anchises and carried him out of danger, away from the flames that were burning Troy. Similarly, I did Caesar. I carried Caesar to the other shore. This is one incident which shows clearly to Brutus that Caesar was not as powerful as the Romans had accepted him to be. Thank you very much. That's all for today. We'll carry on in the next class.